Planning Commission. We have Commissioners Joyce, Commissioner Savory, Commissioner Coker, Commissioner Hensley, and Commissioner Surlett and Commissioner Smith here. Commissioner Proctor is not here. First on our order of business is citizen input on non-agenda items. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to bring anything to our attention? Not seeing any citizen input on non-agenda items, we'll move to our public hearings. We have no public hearings tonight. However, next we have new business. First item of new business is an appeal of the planning director's zoning interpretation on the question of moving a home to a vacant C2 zoned property. With that, I would like a staff report from Mr. Brown. And first, Brian, can you tell me your opinion on whether this is a quasi-judicial public hearing or not?
It's not. That's why we placed it under new business. There was no advertisement of this. It's only listed on the agenda.
Okay. Can you then give us a little bit of a staff report?
Sure. The planning department does keep a notebook because there are quite a few instances where we need to make interpretations because the code just isn't clear, and there's oftentimes more meaning. More than one individual can interpret the code differently. There are instances where it's fairly clear, and our code actually gives me the option of doing an interpretation or refusing to do one, which I'm not sure I totally understand, but it does give that. In this instance, after several discussions with Mr. Peter Hostetler, he's in the audience tonight. Probably give him an opportunity to speak if you'd like. Trying to look at this issue of moving a home off of a existing property over to another property that happens to be Zone C2, which is our commercial highway zoning district. And in the typical sense of the word, when you look through the zoning ordinances for that zone district and look at the listed allowed uses, you don't see a residential house as a outright permitted use. And so in your packet tonight, I've included, besides my interpretation, a copy of the relevant pages of the code so that you can leaf through there and kind of see how it's organized and set. And through the discussions, tried to find a way to allow this house move. And in the end, I felt obligated in my interpretation of the code to say, no, it's not allowed. And really, the primary reason that I took that stance is that when it doesn't really matter what location that this home's proposed to move to, what's most relevant is the fact that it's a C2 zone piece of property. But in general, and especially in this location where the C2 zoning is at, there was a determination sometime in the past, I didn't try to figure out the whole history of the zoning in that area, that it's currently pretty much all developed in homes, but it has commercial zoning. And so the homes are quite old. They're probably about 1935 vintage. And so when you get homes that are of that vintage, in one hand you look at that area and you say, hey, here's an area that's potentially ripe for transition to another use. And the city does land needs analysis, and it determines how much of every kind of zoning district is necessary through that land needs analysis. And then we go out and we search for property that would be suitable for those zoning districts. And so that's what I'm assuming happened at some point in the past. And they determined that this particular area where this house needed to be moved was a suitable area for commercial uses in the future, and on top of that appeared to be an area that potentially could be in transition to help successfully change it to that use. And so I guess one of the reasons that my interpretation ended up indicating that we should not allow the provisions that a couple of unique provisions that are in the code that deal with homes in the C2 and or the C1 zone district is that we probably would never see a transition to the intended commercial use if we continued to allow single-family homes in the commercial zone district. The provision that we did focus on, that we found, first of all, it says that any uses that are allowed in the C2 zone, when you look at that, it also indicates, it also allows those uses that are allowed in the C1 zone. And in this,
can I stop you for 1
Yeah.
second? What is it in your consideration, or why is it maybe that we're looking at this just based on the fact that it's a residential house? It seems to me that what we're really looking at is the use, not so much the actual structure. Did you consider that from the perspective of, hey, we don't care what kind of structure is on there, it's whether the use is permitted or not?
right, and when I say
When I see
use, I'm
commercial,
saying,
residential with commercial or office or public or institutional use on 010A, we don't know what they're going to use it for, and I'm not aware that we do know what they would be using it for.
well, that has been determined because the individual trying to move the house has told us that he intends it to be a residential structure.
And residential use as
Right.
well. Okay.
Right. And that brings up one of the issues that we discussed, was if the structure was to be utilized as a mixed residential or office or retail, it is an allowed use in the C2 and the C1 zoning district. And so that's one other option that would make moving it to the same property appropriate. So the provision that we were looking at very closely, and really is the essence of the interpretation, is 16.22.010A4 of the code, which I have attached, that clearly allows an existing home to be altered or enlarged or rebuilt in the case of a fire, and that applies equally to either the C2 or the C1 zoning district. And so more specifically, I think what is in question is whether that statement could include or allow the moving of a home. And in this case, moving from one location to another location in town, and kind of more gray, confusing aspect is we're actually moving a home from an existing C2 zone property where it's a non-conforming use today to another C2 zone property. And so that makes it even more difficult in terms of saying no, because if you really think about it, we're not really taking up C2 zone property, which is one of the reasons that I'm concerned, is that we'll never get this area to transition to commercial uses if we keep moving homes into it. But we're not really losing a net amount of C2 zone property because we're freeing up the C2 zone property for commercial type uses where it's being moved from. So that was another issue that was kind of relevant to this. But that's my basic interpretation, is that it's very important in my mind to focus on the word existing, and I think the intent of the code as written because of this need to transition when you designate property to whatever zoning districts are normally allowed, the uses, is that it applies you're expanding or rebuilding, et cetera, if it's on that existing property. There's a house there and you want to rebuild it, expand it because of the reasons stated, then clearly you can.
Brian, do you have any thoughts? This section 4 here looks to me like boilerplate grandfather clause language for the zoning ordinance, where you're providing that the existing use can remain there and be rebuilt in the event it's destructed, even though it's a non-conforming use. Have you?
That kind of statement that talks about if in case of a fire or natural, that is very boilerplate. The fact of where it's located in the C1 district may or may not be, and where they've inserted it, but that part certainly is boilerplate. I've seen that in lots of zoning ordinances, usually in a non-conforming section of the code. The statement's actually not in the non-conforming section, it's in this zoning district section. So that makes it a little bit unique in the fact where it's located. So there really isn't too much more that I have to say about it. If you have questions about the written interpretation or any other thought processes that you may have gone through, I felt like the best way to air this and allow you to make an interpretation is if I put something in writing. It's always easier to respond than if I was just to come and blabber about it. This way you can see. And if I make interpretations quite frequently, and some of them I do put in writing, even if they're not challenged, so that 6 months later or another staff person comes along and if they have a question, and they'll look in this zoning interpretation notebook, which I do occasionally, to see how past planning directors have thought about certain provisions that are confusing.
Let's follow our traditional, as if this was a public hearing, so everybody's kind of comfortable with the process. We'll go to questions for Brian now, and then we'll allow the gentleman to come to the microphone and give his take after he hears the rest of the finality of the staff report. So is there any other questions for Brian?
Yeah, I have one. From what I read, this is an old home. This is something we're trying to save. Is that?
Yeah, and on one hand, I wrote my interpretation actually without that really being that relevant, but I'm concerned about the house, the structure, because they have been working on this for years, since I've been here for almost 5 years, trying to figure out what to do with this structure.
I think we talked about this at the last meeting briefly, and it's not a registered home, but it's on a Canby list, correct?
It's on the city's register of historic landmarks. It's not on a national register.
Okay. And how many of those are here?
There's only three
Only
that are designated in the city.
Brian, I need your help connecting the dots here. By the was it the 4A, or sorry, 4 you talked about, section 4? It talks about the C1 zone, right? This house is going to go into a C2 zone.
Right.
And this doesn't, and the conditional uses for a C2 zone are the ones listed as conditional in C1, or the use permitted in M1 or detached WTS facility. So I'm not really understanding how that paragraph pertains to even this issue right now.
Right. It pertains because when you look at the C2 zone, it says that anything that's listed in the C1 zone that's permitted outright is also permitted in the, and so wherever in the C1 you're reading something about in the C1, it's also applying to the C2. It's kind of confusing the way they've set up the code that way.
Yeah, I think that's where my confusion comes from.
Any other questions for Mr. Brown? Director Brown. Okay. Sir, would you like to come up and tell us your position on this interpretation question?
Yes, please.
Please state your name and your record for the name and address for the record, even though we.
My name is Peter Hostetler, and I'm with Ken Hostetler Construction. And I'm here basically to appeal Brian's interpretation based on the intent of the code, past precedents, and previous experience. I'm going to hand out a map to you guys.
Thank you, sir.
Basically, what I'm trying to do is get land use approval to relocate a residential historic landmark from 139 Southwest 2nd to 138 South Knott. Both of these lots are zoned C2 commercial zoning. Code allows for the existing dwelling units within the commercial zone to be altered as found in Chapter 4. It's the section where we've already referred to, that Brian's referred to. And if you look at, I'll bring another document up in regards to a building application permit, which will help tie this together. I believe it is the intent of the code to gradually, over time, transition residential uses from this district to commercial uses and not eliminate the residential uses outright. We have a lot of property zoned commercial that's still primarily being used as residential. If you look at the, in fact, if you look at the map I just handed you, you can see the two different locations. The existing location has quite a bit of commercial surrounding it, whereas the proposed location has quite a bit of residential surrounding it, still being used as such. Thus, the code allows existing dwelling units within these districts to be altered within the district. By relocating this historic residence, we are simply altering the place where it rests. By relocating this landmark, its current location will then be available for commercial development. I have provided multiple cost estimates to the existing lots for the property owners who just want to develop this, I provided multiple cost estimates to the existing lots property owners for just such commercial development. Currently, this historic landmark is an obstacle to that development on that lot. So if it is the intent of the code to allow the altering of existing dwelling units within the commercial zone and making room for commercial uses while preserving historic landmarks, then this proposal hits all those marks. I want to hand out another piece of paper. I only pursued this proposal because I've done something like it before. From the start, this is based on a past precedence regarding an identical project. I moved a residential house from 490 Northwest 3rd to 486 Northwest 3rd in 2009, and both lots were zoned commercial, and the project was permitted as a residential alteration. If you look at the first page, the building permit application, at the top, it talks about the type of work, and we have to check the boxes. And additions and alterations and replacements are all under the same check mark box. There is no check mark box for relocation because it's listed and permitted under the alteration. And you can see that it was also indicated as a residential project. So the interpretation by previous staff was that relocating could be defined as an alteration. A discussion at the recent mayor's breakfast for leaders in the construction industry brought up this exact frustration that people have with the city's view regarding development as city staff change. The code is supposed to bring consistency to the city's view of development. I was born and I lived in the house at 246 Southwest 2nd, which is across the street from the existing historic landmark. And I'm a fourth generation Canby High School graduate, and Ken Hostetler Construction has been operated in Canby for almost 34 years, and we will continue to do business in Canby. It would be nicer if the city was more development friendly and honor past precedent and be consistent in their interpretations. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'll feel free to answer those.
Peter,
Yes.
that existing house is, part of that was the original, and then there was an addition put on the back, wasn't it, on that house?
On what house?
The house that you want to move.
The house I want to move, there's someone here from the Historic Review Board if you want to ask her questions about the historical nature of the home. I don't know a lot. I know that there's been additions to that historical home, but it's one of 3 properties indicated as a landmark in Canby.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you move the house, you're going to move the whole front?
Yeah, we're moving the whole thing, the porches and everything.
Okay. Curious.
So now you're showing you want to move a residential structure to a commercial zone and use it for residential purposes.
Yeah, it's an existing dwelling unit within that zone, and we can alter that.
It's not within that zone, though. The problem is it's not within that zone. It's
No, the
a
zone
block
is,
and a half away. It's in a
it's the
different-
same zone. That's all the zone, that's all C2 zoning.
It's just on the edge of C2.
But it's not, what I'm saying is that house is not a use currently at all on that parcel.
Correct, and I'm
It's in a
saying
different parcel.
it's an existing use in the zone, and I'm not changing the use within the zone. It's allowed within the zone. That's what the interpretation was before, is we're not adding a dwelling unit to the zone, and we're not taking a dwelling unit away. We're consolidating them to allow expansion for the commercial developments that want to take place.
Can you show me where you think in the C2 zone that a purely residential use is an allowable use?
If you, C2, anything that's allowed in the C2 zone is, or anything allowed in the C1 zone is allowed in the C2 zone.
And where in the C1 zone is a purely residential use allowed?
If you read, I'll bring it back up. It's in Chapter 16, uses permitted outright. You go down to the number 4, existing dwelling units which are not incidental and attached to a use allowed in the C1 zone may be altered, that's what I'm saying, this falls under an alteration, expanded, or rebuilt in case of fire, provided that such additions or rebuilding comply with the development standards of dwelling units for the R2 zone. So I'm saying this falls under the alteration clause, like it did back in 2009 when I moved the other house.
So you think you could just build a residential
No,
lot there?
I'm not asking to do that. I'm asking to move an existing dwelling unit in the C2 zone to another lot in the C2 zone, keep it within the same zone.
Right, now I understand what you're asking, but we have to interpret our code, and so that would mean that
It's an alteration.
You can just approve a residential lot in a commercial zone.
I'm saying you can
Residential use.
approve the dwelling unit, the residential use within the existing residential use within the same existing
Okay.
zone. That's what we did back in 2009. It's pretty cut and dry. We didn't even come to the Planning Commission to ask for, it was just staff made an interpretation that, because if you look at the building permit application again, it fell under addition, alteration, or replacement. So this is just another you can expand it, alter it. I mean, alter is a broad term. And so, I mean, that's why it fell under that last time. And so, you know, I've been thinking about this for 2 years and trying to find a lot. There's a lot goes into a move and a lot of costs. You have to coordinate. You got to move power lines and all these kinds of things. And so this came up. It was feasible. It's something we had done before. And so I'm trying to rely on previous experience. The code hasn't changed since that time. And so as a property owner, as a building someone in the building trades, you try to rely on what you've done before, and this is something we've done before. The only difference now is there's a different interpretation, and so I'm just asking the city to be consistent and honor the past precedent.
Any other questions?
Not yet.
Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to have public input on this?
My name is Carol Palmer, and I'm on the Historic Review Board. And what's being passed out to you right now is a little bit more information about the background on that house. And I thought rather than just reading it to you, I'd put it down so that you could take a look at it. I would ask you to look at the top, the second row there of photos. Third one over is Victor LeDrew Mack. This is his father's house. This is where Victor grew up. He was the mayor of Canby on 2 occasions, from 1894 to 95, and again from 1906 to 1908. And as you can see from what I've gathered, the information I've gathered on this house, it is indeed a unique property. It's not just an old house. It's not just a residence. It's a house that has linkages to people who were, during the latter part of the 19th century, critical to the economic and civic development of this community. And I think we can probably all agree, and this would be my first point, that these kinds of historic properties aren't just residences. They're actually cultural, social, and civic resources. And I would argue also that from the Historic Review Board's viewpoint, they are also economic resources. If you look across the valley and in other states across the nation, you'll find that cities everywhere are taking a look at these with a fresh set of eyes, and many of them are doing things like creating festivals, events, heritage trails, things to attract visitors to enhance the commercial viability of retail areas. And so even though this is in a commercial zone and this is a residential property, it can be used still as something that is attractive to people who want to visit the town. Of course, in order to do that, you have to package these properties. And one of the ways you can do that is with a heritage trail. And on the Historic Review Board, one of the things that we're looking at is, since Canby sort of behind the times on taking advantage of that kind of thing and thinking about these as economic resources, we're looking at putting together a portfolio of heritage trails that can be used, tailored to different kinds of access, bicycle groups, tour buses, walking tours, those sorts of things. And by having different options with different themes and different geographies, even partnering with some of our sister cities here, we can attract visitors and hopefully some business to the retail sector here. Our first project is going to be on this side of the highway in the commercial zone around here. Eventually, we'll want to do something on that side of the highway. And unfortunately, we don't have as robust an inventory of properties on that side. It is a bit weaker. So any property that's removed from that inventory, sort of sets us back. And what makes this one so nice is that tie to Macksburg. Because if we're talking about bicycle touring and we're talking about heritage trails with bicycling, it's nice to have ones that spread out from various communities, say from Aurora to Canby, and could hit Macksburg, and then we'd have that nice tie to the Mack home here. I know there's a concern about setting precedent. If you move a home from one C2 area to another C2 area, what's to stop other people from wanting to move residences? And I would say, I think the facts speak for themselves on the Mack home. It's very unique. It's only one of 3 that the city has recognized. It dates back to 1879. It really is a small treasure, and this is a chance to save it. So I would encourage you to approve the request.
Any questions?
What's going to be done with this house if it's not moved?
I understand that Zora Lutheran Church wants it destroyed. It wants it off the property, however, but I would defer to Mr. Hostetler.
I provided a cost estimate to Zor to tear it down as well. I provided multiple estimates to tear it down and then to rebuild a commercial structure in its place. So they want it to be gone.
So it's either going to be moved or destroyed?
Yes.
Is there any other one that wants to be public input? Okay, with that, we will close public input and move to planning commission discussion. Does anyone like to start off with any comments?
Chair, if I could make one response to Mr. Hostetler. As we discussed the previous instance at the front counter, I did spend a little time looking at a couple of the files related to that previous instance that he indicated. And what I discovered was that the home at the northwest corner of Elm and Second that was moved from the corner to the next lot over wasn't quite the exact same situation, because what it appears, and I don't have anybody to corroborate, but what I do have is a tax lot file that has a plot plan showing the location of this moved home in its original location. And at that time, there were 2 tax lots, and they were owned by the same person. And actually, there was only a single tax lot. There were 2 platted lots, and it was a single tax lot under single ownership. And the owner apparently, from what the records appear to say, wanted to move the home so that they could resurrect the platted lots and sell them separately, and they couldn't where it was setting, because it was partly over a property, like a original platted lot line. So in that instance, it's my belief that whoever made the decision at that time indicated it was a continuing residential use on that tax lot, and so they allowed the move. And then later, someone came along and decided to, I think, convert that structure, because I understand there's an office use in it now. But as Peter had pointed out at the front counter and with our building permit, which is separate from zoning requirements, it was permitted as a new foundation for a house move. And so it was intended to be a residential use with that permit, but I believe it was allowed without any concerns, because it was a continuing use, residential use, non-conforming use of that C2 zone property. And I think that makes it slightly different than what we're talking about here. 2 different properties owned by different people in different parts of town.
Okay. Anybody want to make any starting comments for our discussion?
Mr. Chair, I think that we're getting so black and white in everything that we're not using common sense in what we need to do here. I mean, we're, like he was saying, we're just going to move up there. This is all around residential. We're saving history of Canby, and I think under the circumstances, I think we should allow this to happen. You know, I think there's always a little room to bend all the rules, but we're getting so rigid in everything except for in our schools, we got to be open to everything. I think our things are getting out of hand, and this is an example right here. We're getting so strict that we can't allow common sense to develop anything. This is my opinion.
Can I ask one more question, Brian? Okay, so I can't really tell from this how close to this, to the, I think that's the medium density residential or low density residential area right below it. How many, is that one lot over, or is that on the net, like right across the street?
It may be right across the street, but I don't have a zoning map here.
I mean, theoretically, if I was looking at this, would this be in you know, if we were to carve that out and make it low density residential, would you have a island of yellow and round surrounded by pink, or would it be a touching? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it would be a spot zoning if that lot was changed, if that's what you're saying.
I'm just playing this one through. I mean, in my mind, I kind of understand what check, and I'm just playing this one through in that. Who's to say this isn't any different than Fred Meyer, where, oh, well, you know, we should have put that line a little bit farther to the left instead of farther to the right. And so now it's, I can't remember what the exact discussion was that we had here, whether it was the core commercial versus highway. You remember it was,
Exactly.
It should have been here, but we wanted it there for one reason. Now we want to move it back. And if it's just one street over.
Yeah, it's not right on the edge of the designated C2 area.
The thing is, too, that both places right there where it's going to go in is a residential, there's probably in 30 to 40 years, there'll never be a commercial piece that going on there because of the houses that are there existing now. And it's just a little bitty lot. They're just gonna slide it over there, put it in there, and I can't see anything wrong with it. And we're gonna save the house or have a historical thing, to me. I mean, if it was in a rural commercial area that was gonna be developed commercial, maybe so. But in this case, where they wanna move that, it's residential now anyway. And it's just a little bitty lot they're gonna put it on. There's a little bitty house on the one side, and there's this other house here, which is commercial, used for commercial use right now. But and it's the way it's located, there's nothing, I don't see anything going into commercial for, at least definitely not my lifetime.
Chuck, I agree with your common sense point there. I can't see anything wrong with moving a house over to that spot, except for the fact that I think their planning staff has it right. I mean, I think their interpretation, when you read the code and look at the language of the code, is basically exactly right. I mean, I don't believe that it counts as altering a house on an existing lot under an existing use to move that house to a different lot. You know, the use, you look at use under our code definition, use means what are you doing with the property? You know, is it a retail store? Is it a house? You know, residence? Is it a school? What is the use that's going on at the place? And so when I look at that and I look at the actual, you say we're being maybe overly formalistic, or I don't know the words you used, and maybe so, but I think staff has the interpretation right on that provision. However, I also wonder, though, because of the common sense aspect to it, whether we couldn't approve this under Code Section 1628010Q, which is a C2 use, is a similar commercial use as determined by the Planning Commission. If we determined the use of this to be similar to the existing current, you know, I guess sort of non-conforming commercial use in the zone, whether that would sort of solve both problems. And you know, staff has, I think, the right interpretation of the way that this gentleman wanted to use that other provision, but that we might be able to accomplish common sense with the exceptions that are written into our code. One of the things that's crosses my mind. Anybody else? Thoughts?
Chair?
Yeah.
The other piece of it that I keep coming back to is the historical nature of this home. I don't think that it's setting precedents by moving this. You have precedents of 3 homes. That's all that's going to be. I call it a wash, like Chuck's saying. I mean, we're looking at a piece of property in the C2 for a piece of property in the C2. All you're doing is swapping property. You're allowing a commercial development to happen because it's going to happen either way, but it's going to allow us to save this home, that I think is very important. I mean, we don't have any architectural history in this country, which is ridiculous, I think. But really, that's all we're doing, is we're just trading a piece of property to save the home. And really a piece of property that I don't see being used anytime soon. If they come back to us in 20 years and say we want to move it again and it goes out of the C2, then it stays out.
That's probably what will happen.
Yeah, and I think that it would probably get moved again just for the historic nature of it.
This will be the 4th move.
Of that home? So, yeah, I mean, if they come back in 20 years and move it out of the C2, then it stays out of the C2. There's no way for them to bring it back in, and that's fantastic. But I think it's a way for them to buy a piece of property they can set it on, kind of a marker, so to say. We're going to sit over here for right now until we can figure someplace else for it to go.
So I don't dispute anything you said, but to me, that's not answering the question. The question that's being asked is to move a house from a C2 zone to a C2 zone. Well, to answer that question, we'd say, is a purely residential property approvable at all in a C2 zone? And the normal answer would be no. It's just not. It's already there, yes. But if you just took this other lot where he wants to move it to and said, hey, can I put a 100% residential property there, the answer would be no. And so the moving it isn't the question. If he was moving from an R1 to an R1, we don't care if he's moving, because it's approved already in both places. What he's trying to do is move it from a C2, where it's non-conforming right now, it's a grandfathered use, to a different C2 lot where it wouldn't normally be allowed. That's what I have the problem too with, just sort of our code, and I think, well, like I said, I thought staff had interpreted that provision right, but maybe we could get around it.
Well, and I agree that they did, the provision is correct, and the interpretation, I think, was correct, but I see the lenience because of what the home is, not because that it's a home.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe if we're gonna move that direction, we can put that out front, that we're not gonna have this come back to us and bite us later on. It's a special provision because of the nature of the home.
I like that word. Is that the section you just quoted?
Yeah, not exactly. It wasn't word for word. The one that I was looking at was this 1628.010, and then Q, similar commercial uses as determined by the Planning Commission. That's almost the same.
Yeah,
This is 020.
This comes from the R1. So if you look at like this, and this is,
Oh,
I don't know
that's
if you're reaching too far. I'm reaching too far on this, but if you look at C2 conditional uses as permitted in the C1, you go to C1 conditional uses as permitted in the R1, and then you go into other developments customarily found with a residential zone as determined by the Planning Commission. Although it's an other use though.
But I mean, I think the historical aspect of it gives it somewhat of a commercial quality, is what I was getting at with that. Obviously, since it's purely residential use, it's not maybe technically a commercial use to fit under that Q. The reason I brought that up is because it's got that similar commercial uses where it's this historic building.
Right.
So it's, as the Historical Society gentlelady said, it's got a commercial aspect to it. And so that's what I thought might, allow us to be a little more lenient, but still following with our code.
Well, just because it's residential now doesn't mean it's going to stay that way forever, too. It could very easily, since it is in that zoning, could easily become a business at a period down the line.
I have a question for Mr. Brown. Brian, do we have anything under that precedence of a historic home? Do we have any criteria of the home itself? Like a registered home nationally has criteria that you can or cannot do with the home, things that it can be used for or not. Do we have anything like that here?
I don't really know what you're asking.
Use of the
because-
home. I mean, they can't turn it into. Is there certain things they can't do with it? Certain things they can do with it? Is there,
I think that really just goes back to zoning, because
Okay.
there are many historic structures that the use has changed, and they've still maintained their historic nature. And that's one of the chief things in historic preservation is there's those purists and those that understand that in order to save some of these structures, you have to be able to adapt them and such for them to be useful for the owners and people, and so they change the purpose and they repurpose them, but they try to save as much of the original character as they can. And so that there are uses that change over time, but those uses comes back to our zoning code and the community that they're in and complying with those requirements.
Okay.
And Chair Smith has the right idea in that we have used this Q section, and you have a similar one in the C1 zone, that's the KK section. Similar commercial uses is determined by the Planning Commission. Well, that one's talking commercial uses, which makes the stretch a little bit greater, but the one in the C2 district just says similar uses as determined by the Planning Commission. Staff has used that quite frequently in order to figure out uses that aren't listed in our code at all, where to put them. And if we have a question that, in our mind, that's great enough, staff has often brought them to the Planning Commission in years past and asked you guys, do you think this is a use that we could say is appropriate? My only hesitation in this case is that it says similar uses to those listed. And since there isn't anything residential listed except a mixed-use residential, it makes me think you're stretching somewhat. But other than that, that might be the provision to try to use. I'd probably feel more comfortable with that, stretching that, because it leaves open interpretation, more so than I believe the other did.
Well, I think I could support a finding from us that because of the historical nature of that particular building, the fact that we only have 3 in the city of Canby, and that we've heard from our historical review committee, at least one person on it, that that's sufficient to have some commerciality, commercial purposes out of the use from that particular building, that it would fit under that Q. That would be my take. I don't think I could vote in favor of the interpretation overturning the way the staff wrote it. I just, maybe I'm too
No,
legal-minded in my profession.
I'm with you in that, I mean, this is the way I voted when it came down to the Fred Meyer fueling station, is the zoning is the zoning. We made whoever decided that when they did it, I'm assuming that they took their time and they thought it through. However, I also think it's our place to a certain extent to plan for this, or help plan for the city. And so if there is a way inside of the rules to ensure that this house is not demolished and that it's utilized, if we move it to a C2, that's fine, as long as we can find some sort of legal justification. I don't know that I necessarily agree that altered is the right term. But
used previously.
Right, but, and I don't necessarily disagree with the precedent conversation either, but I also know that precedents have been set that were incorrect in the past in other instances and things like that. So I'm not opposed to finding a way to make this work. We got to find it where it's written in here that I think everyone feels comfortable with. Because there are only 3 houses, and I think we do need to maintain a sort of historical understanding. I would like to see the city maybe take a step towards doing something about that, as opposed to we just hold older buildings around just because they're older. But that's a problem I think I have with all kinds of things like that.
And they keep me around longer.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, more discussion, or is there a motion on the floor?
Chair, I kind of like the idea that Carol had indicated about this precedent issue. By using this Q provision, if you were to make some sort of statement that in your findings it's related to the historic home moving, then I don't feel like staff would be pressed in the future when somebody wanted to either build or move a regular home onto a C2 zone property. Because that would be my only concern, if we can limit it because of our findings here that it's historic nature. That's not really going to set a precedent, because there aren't going to be any other historic homes that want to move to a C2 zone.
I'd be willing to even take that farther, in that noting that the properties that surround the proposed location are of the exact similar use now. Yes, they may lay in the C2 zone, but they are residential. So because in light of the fact that it's residential surrounding that property, it is one of only 3 historic homes, and you're moving it from, you're not changing the zoning either, you're taking it from a C2 to a C2.
Move this into a motion.
I'm rolling with it. I'm hoping somebody's recording this so we can play it back. But, and then because of those 3 things, I mean, I would be willing to move forward with it. Now, if I could remember what I just said, I would be happy to make a motion on that. Matter of fact, I am willing to right now.
Okay, let's.
I'm going to see if I can do it
And I
again.
think you should second if you're on board.
Yeah.
As a ritual here for your guys' last minute.
Mr. Chair, I move that we, I guess, what would this be, Brian? An approval or a rebuttal to you? I'm not quite sure how you would.
I
The
think,
determination, because it's as determined by,
yeah, you're just making a
Code says-
determination. I wouldn't
Okay.
even refer to the interpretation.
I move that we make the determination that this move is appropriate and is within the guidelines of, 162801, based upon the specific 3 criteria of it's being moved to a location that is surrounding by like use, which is residential. It is one of 3 historic homes, which gives it special status in the community, and it's being moved from a C2 zone to a C2 zone, so it's not changing its zoning. And because of those 3 reasons, I move that we determine that this is an appropriate move.
And I'll second it.
I would make a motion to amend those 3 findings to add in that we've heard testimony on the historical nature of it, that adds a commercial aspect to it because of the historical nature of it. It adds a sort of a peculiar historical/commercial aspect to this particular project that we think puts it in under that Q section.
I'll second your amendment, if I can, to create amplification.
Is there any discussion on we'll vote on my amendment first. Is there any discussion on my amendment? All those in favor just of my amendment, not on the actual determination, signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed to my amendment signify by saying nay. Now on Sean's main motion, all those in favor of the determination as laid out by Sean and amended signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. Ayes have it. Brian, you got that?
Yeah.
Okay. Good luck. Don't get electrocuted when you're rolling it down the street. Thank you. The next item of business we have is presentation on the city's landscaping ordinance. Planning Director Brian Brown.
Okay, I thought since we had a light agenda that I'd take advantage of sharing with you a work session PowerPoint that I had with the council at the request of the mayor. And currently, just last week, I had another work session with the council, and the topic of that work session was on our downtown 2-story and floor area ratio requirements and their interrelationship and such. And so there might be an opportunity to share some things with you on that too. But in general, the mayor and the council wanted to be educated on what our landscaping ordinance provisions were, so they can see if there was any relevance to what they're currently thinking on projects and goals and such, and give staff an opportunity to let them know if we've found any issues in implementing our landscape ordinance over time. And so we can talk about any of those or anything that some of you are older members, older in the sense of being here for a while, that are now leaving us, if you've noticed anything that you might want to share with staff and the other planning commissioners.
The two problems that I've seen us have where our code makes no sense was landscaping requirement for 0 setback properties. That one needs a correction in our code. And we had the problem with I don't remember the name of the church that's on
Yeah, I know what you're...
The one that we required them to have a park?
a park bench.
Yeah.
We had to put in a bench so it would be called a park. Because somewhere in our code required there to be a special bonus for having a park or something like that.
That's right.
And those were two things that I believed were totally unnecessary, but were requirements our code had in them.
So we can easily talk about potentially both of those.
There was also an issue with the library design, with the amount of landscaping required that wasn't necessarily, I don't believe, in conformity with the rest of the downtown. Like, if I remember right, the code was being pushed to where they were going to have to produce all kinds of landscaping requirements that would not have necessarily been consistent. If if I remember correctly.
I remember there was a bicycle rack thing where they
There
were
was also-
going to landscape under the bicycle rack
Yeah.
so they could make it
Yeah,
fit
they
or
were gonna put
something.
grass underneath the bicycle rack. That's right. I mean, the downtown's got a park, right? It's got a very large park. And I think that's there to offset the commercial nature of a downtown, is that you bring a park in. It's kind of like, I mean, obviously in a grossly different avenue, but it's kind of like Central Park in New York City. You know, this ginormous park in that city for a reason, to offset the huge amounts of buildings and concrete and everything else.
Because the grass is over there, right?
Right, exactly. That's where you go if you want the park, as opposed to trying to put a park in a business front yard.
It's kind of funny, I'll get on the soapbox here for a second, because all the statewide land use planners, the geniuses in Salem, that require us to have all these particular code provisions, want to push everybody to build everything as a skyscraper in the center of town, and yet they also want you to have greenery and animals and wildlife running through your concrete. It just doesn't make much sense.
It doesn't always go together.
So those are very good introductory remarks, and so you may actually have some moderate concerns about the purpose statements that are in our ordinance as to why we have a landscape ordinance. And so that's where we usually start.
Yeah, let's read that one, see if we can
So
get Mr. Hensley in here.
I did put a picture up here if any of you guys recall the old First Avenue and our big maple trees here. And it's just kind of interesting, not only, you know, we're talking landscaping tonight, but you see the big maple trees that are gone, but what's more fascinating to me is to see the other differences between this before and after picture. Here, the most dominant thing, of course, were the 75-year-old maple trees, but second is the electric overhead poles that you see, and then the kind of disarray of the railroad parking lot and lack of landscaping around it.
Brian, this was all publicly funded though, right? This entire project, that's our
Yes.
beautiful
It's
example
the
of the right way to do
streetscape.
things, is all publicly funded.
That's right.
That's an entirely different ballgame than we're talking to somebody that wants to come in and, you know, start a new business and fix up
No.
the...
Sure it is, but what this is showing you is a good example of what our landscape ordinance resulted in.
Right.
In the areas that are being planted, and that's what I wanted to point out here in the after picture, is that
And I see that as different than what, like, when I was talking about a new building going in that's a common area that you're walking through there, as opposed to the front space of a business, or, and even, you know, call the library a business,
Right.
call the city hall even a business, because really it's a co-use in that sense.
right.
But yeah, this is definitely an example of it being done right.
But it just shows you the type of shrubbery and trees and things that, in this particular case, you're right, it's on a kind of a public project and such, but it does transfer over to what we're requiring on the private properties as well, because they're using the similar landscaping provisions. But here it indicates what the basic standards intent is to encourage retention, protection of existing trees, and planting of new trees with new development, and using trees and other landscape materials to temper the effects of sun, wind, noise, and air pollution, and using trees and landscape materials to define spaces and uses for specific areas, like in the downtown First Avenue, that was a specific use and area. And then using trees and landscape to unify, you know, various elements within the urban environment. All the provisions that we have in the code are minimum. That's how codes are set up. They're basically setting a minimum. You can always do more. And we encourage people to do more. They want to improve the livability of our residential neighborhoods, enhance the customer attraction in the commercial areas, increase property values, improve the compatibility of adjacent uses, provide visual separation and physical buffers between certain incompatible uses, provide visual relief from expanses of parking lots, and screen some undesirable views, and overall contribute to the image and appeal of the community. And I think landscaping does that all the way around. And of course, again, the mitigation of temperatures, air, and pollution, because we know landscaping is living and help with those kind of things. They save our planet, so to speak. They also, our landscaping
They
ordinances.
promote urban wildlife habitat.
That's exactly,
That would be the raccoons and the opossums.
that's
And the
right.
turkeys.
Oh, yeah, turkeys.
Our roaming candy turkeys.
Yeah.
Really?
The,
When I was a kid, I used to hunt turkeys.
we amended the
got
landscape
some flock
ordinance
of
not that
them.
long ago to promote low-impact development, which is basically erosion and stormwater control. And so they're also, a forest is the very best thing for controlling stormwater runoff. If you clear-cut a forest, then you have massive erosion, and the streams become filthy and you kill the fish. And so it serves that purpose in an urban environment, maybe to a lesser degree, but it has the same purpose in an urban environment. And so those that may not think that promoting erosion control and providing habitat may not be looking broadly enough, because landscaping does provide for various animals as well, and birds and such, and can do so very much so in an urban environment too. So there are those philosophies that say, oh, the city's for man, and outside the city limits is for nature. There's more people saying now today that no, we need to provide a very good living quality within our urban environments, and we need a lot of green space and open space, and we need landscaping in the urban environment as well. And so where do we distribute that and how do we do it is what the basic landscape ordinance standards that we have.
And I see we've got a carbon dioxide reduction thing in here too.
Yeah.